All right. So aside from that, I wanted to show you, we got a guest speaker coming, which I was very glad to get. I've been trying to get him for a while. We got Marco Palacios coming, and I won't be here next week, but I'll be remoting it. So the room will be open, and I'll have volunteers opening, and you can connect in by Zoom, which is what I'll be doing. So he'll be here, and I'll be remote because I'll be at SyncCon. And then I've got, just today, got Leonard Bailey. This guy is very good from the Department of Justice. I've seen him twice at B-Sides. I'm very glad to have him. I learned a lot about the legal position of cybersecurity from him and the consequences of reporting vulnerabilities and the punishments for hacking and stuff that's really very important. So I think that will be very good. And all right. And so let's see what else there is to see in the news. Oh, there's the big news, which Caitlin just verified, which is that sudo apparently has been broken for years, and everybody can just get root on every Linux system by just using user account -1.
Yeah, it's non-standard.
Yes, there shouldn't be, the lowest user account ought to be 0, and that ought to be root, but apparently if you put in -1, it misinterprets it and just lets you use it without having, basically makes everybody a sudoer. Your password will be accepted to become root. And apparently this has been true of all versions of sudo for a long time. So there was a similar vulnerability about 8 years ago when I taught advanced hacking the first time. At that time, Solaris had a vulnerability that if you used our login to connect to another server as root, it would forget to verify the password entirely. And you could just be root in any server at any time. And again, it was like 6 months before anybody noticed. So this has been years before anybody noticed. It's kind of like Heartbleed, where all the SSH, all the HTTPS servers on Linux were vulnerable for 2 years to anybody just stealing the private keys of encryption, and nobody noticed for about 2 years. So it is a surprising amount of really serious vulnerabilities that come out and last a long time before people catch it. Somebody needs to speak to me offline, to speak to me after class. Yeah, sure, I guess you can call me on the phone just to remind me at the end of class. We can do it that way. All right, fair enough. All right, and okay. And if anybody wants to give a talk today, some remote people may want to give a talk via Zoom. I'm ready to make a list of those who wish to give a presentation today. So far, I only got one. I kind of think there might be more. You're another? Okay, do you want it recorded or not?
No, I was just going to do it.
Yeah, but shall I record it and put it on YouTube, or would you rather not?
No, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, what's your name?
Okay.
Okay, good. You're on this list. Good. All right. I just keep track of them, so I'll do the ones that want to be recorded separately from the other. All right, good. Anyway, so let's see what else there is in the news. And Caitlin tried it, and that sudo thing seems to be true. So I right-click and nothing happens. Well, I'm sort of used to computers being like this. Fine. How about this? That might do something. Anyway, all right, let's close some of these and see what else might be fun. We've only got a couple of minutes before class, which is fine. I'll just mention a couple of them here. So there's a Troll Factory, which I thought wasn't a very interesting game. I tried playing it for a while, but in any case, you can go through this, and it does help people perhaps understand what happened. They take real disinformation that was used to affect the 2016 election and have people play like the Russians doing this, so you can be aware. And obviously, apparently 40% of Americans are not aware that all this stuff is fake and that it's active attacks by our enemies. For example, our president appears to actually believe this stuff. That was what was horrifying to me about that phone call. Not so much that he was trying to rig elections by getting help from foreign people, because I knew he was doing that. But what I didn't know is that he believes his own lies. He believes that the Ukrainians hacked the DNC and Hillary Clinton was in on it, and they hid the server in Ukraine, because he just believes this cartoonish right-wing stuff, which is garbage. And apparently 40% of Americans believe that stuff, or maybe 25% of Americans. So anyway, it might be good for awareness for them to play this game where you see it from the other side. Anyway, is it okay to do Equifax? Sure, sure. I'll put you on the list. Would you rather be recorded or not, Ignacio? Just tell me. Okay, good. I'll put you on the list. I have a list. Good. Anyway, so you might send people to play that game. And Everybody hates Catalina. Apparently, I never put on Mac updates until a year later. They're always terrible. But this one, people are complaining even more than usual. Apparently, it breaks everything. I know one thing they did is they decided to cut all 32-bit app support. So that broke a ton of apps people want to use. That is something Apple is very famous for. Apple typically only supports 2 versions back. Microsoft supports years back, like 15 years back, because Microsoft knows that there are businesses who are using some old app written for Windows 3.1 that does something like run the cash registers that is super important. And that's why they are so popular. They support really, really old stuff, even though, of course, that's not secure, but they're aware of the fact that many businesses need it. Apple is pretty much just for home users, and they don't care about businesses. And so they just vigorously abandon everything that's old. But anyway, people are very upset. Apparently, if you upgrade, it happened to you, right? If you upgrade to the next version of Mac, you're pretty much sorry and wish you hadn't done it. So that's why I never do. Not for a long time. And here's similar complete garbage. A NASA engineer, I'm surprised that nobody at NASA controls this stuff. A NASA engineer had this brilliant idea that you could have a rock on a spring and you could push it this way, and when it hits the wall, it'll come back. And since you're going near the speed of light when it's going one way, its mass increases more than when it goes the other way. And this is, I know. And he thinks, therefore, you can get energy for nothing and make a rocket ship, and he's published this. And this you would learn in the very first physics class. This is complete garbage. Einstein's fundamental principle of relativity explains why this is absolutely not true. This is making the mistake that Newton made, that there is absolute velocity. It's in a different reference frame. That's why, you know, any in physics 1 student on the midterm would get an F for doing this. And a NASA engineer is proposing it with the name of NASA. They really ought to have a PR team that prevents you from putting out bunk science under the name of NASA. But anyway, I know, well, I'm objecting to management. I mean, the fact is you always have lunatics on your staff, but you ought to have a PR team that limits when you make false science statements in the name of your scientific agency. I mean, he could be allowed to have a private blog where he promotes flat earth theories and stuff, but saying it under the name of NASA publicly ought to be, somehow, they ought to be retracting it and all that nonsense. NASA wants to have what? Off the wall ideas? No, that's DARPA. NASA has to really make the ships and they have to really fly. They can't be pushing fake science. No, that's the point. This is absolutely untrue at every level, and Einstein figured it out in 1904, and he was right. That's why it's amazing that he made that mistake. Is amazingly dumb for him to make. There are some others. You could say it'd be fine if he had like a brave cutting edge idea that might actually be worth something, but that's just blinding stupidity and not what I normally expect from NASA. Anyway. So I got a bit of a chapter. I thought there might be so many student presentations that I wouldn't have time, but that does not appear to be the case. So we'll carry on with this stuff, and then I'll have some time for student presentations after this. So we're down to the second part. I broke this chapter up into 4 pieces, which I think is a good thing. And so here we are. So we're going to talk about the risk management life cycle. This is a process that goes around in a circle where you make something, test it, improve it, and then go around and around the cycle. And there are just formal rules for this. So you have to start by defining the scope. Your information security risk management program only applies to something like one location, one business process, one company. After you've done that, then you have to assign roles and responsibilities of who's working on it. And then you have workflow, business rules, and business records. And there are several standards. We'll cover 4 of them here. And as we talked about before, these compliance standards are very important. And I observe that my light is not on, making me think that this thing is not using the correct microphone. So let me pause a minute and try to trick my computer into working, which looks like it's going to be far more difficult than I had anticipated. Well, perhaps it is a software issue. Select a microphone. No, it is a hardware issue. It is not seeing a microphone. Well, at home, I found that the built-in microphone works okay. Okay, good. Now it's working. There. Default. Okay, good. So this should be better. All right. So anyway, these frameworks and standards are very important in the real world. So here's the story. You start by deciding the scope, and then you go around this circle. You're doing identifying risks, analyzing them, treating the risks, and then assessing to see how well you've successfully treated the risk, and then trying it again. And you have to constantly do this because things keep changing. New risks keep appearing, your treatments go out of date, your business processes change, so risks, your importance of risks might change, and you've got threat advisories coming in on the left full of new threats. This you subscribe to Department of Homeland Security alerts or something, or just read the news. There's always new risks coming in, like they find a bug in sudo or something. And on the right, you've got to keep evaluating your assets, and you've got to be deciding how much risk you're willing to take. That's your risk appetite. So all these things are constantly changing, and they have to be constantly reviewed and updated. So that's the definition of scope. You have to identify your assets, which is far more difficult than you'd think. I know that people, my friends in retail, when I was a kid, always used to dread the day of inventory. And I thought, how can it be this hard to just count up how much stuff you have? But it is, and it shouldn't be, of course, and that's because you have theft. Internal employee theft is the main reason. Just counting the items on the shelf ought to be simple. It's how much you bought minus how much customers took, but that's not really true unless you do inventory. Your employees are stealing it. Anyway, so identify, and in software, it's much worse. Most companies, if you just ask them, you have the all important data like your customers' credit card numbers, how many copies are there of that and where are they? That's a really important question, and most companies cannot answer that question at all. It's on thumb drives and email accounts and Dropbox. It's just all over the place. And so the first thing you have to do is get tidied up to where you actually control where your data is. Anyway, then you decide how much risk you can take, and you go through this cycle. You assess the risk, you assess the vulnerabilities, and look at threats and risk analysis. You consider the probability of a bad thing that might happen, the impact if it did happen, and then you decide what mitigation, if necessary, you should put to lower that risk if it is worth lowering. And then you have a recommendation. So there are 4 risk treatments. You can accept a risk, or you just do nothing. Now, this is what amateurs do. People who do not do risk management at all just accept risks. And this is appropriate for, say, a small mom and pop restaurant. If the building burns down, they'll just give up and close. And that is when you don't have any risk management. But risk management, if you want to be a bigger, more serious company, you don't accept just the whims of chance like that. You have a plan to survive more disasters. And then people can trust you and sign long-term contracts and expect you to be around because you have a plan to survive problems. So you accept certain problems that are not too bad and would cost too much to prevent. You mitigate ones that are unacceptable and where there is a way to lower the risk that is not too expensive. You transfer the risk when necessary to another company, either by buying insurance or by outsourcing part of your work. You can outsource identity to Facebook or something. You can outsource your security monitoring to a third company, and then there will be an agreement with that company where they accept some of the liability if they get stolen or hacked. So that would transfer the risk to somebody else. And the most extreme is avoidance. This is where you stop doing a business process because you decide it is just too risky. The classic situation in information security management is that amateur administrators are timid and they do not understand what's going on. So they just tell you no, like no social networking at work, no unauthorized use of the wireless network, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it just drives everybody nuts because you can't get anything done. That's why they call them Dr. No, and everybody hates that kind of information security people. Risk avoidance is very extreme, where you actually stop doing something because it's too dangerous. And that should only happen if you really have to do it, and if your business can really afford to just abandon that business process. It sounds simple for the security officer to just say no. In practice, that is not your job. Your job is not to stop the business from working. Your job is to help the business work in a more secure manner. So just saying no is pretty ridiculous. What you probably want to do is mitigate or transfer and say, all right, you need to do this, so I will figure out a better way for you to do that. Anyway, and then you got to communicate with a lot of people, your own people, external regulatory agencies, customers. A lot of people need to know what's going on. And we got risk avoidance going on. We all know about it last week. Because PG&E was held liable for the Camp Fire last year and had to pay an unbelievable amount of damages, they've now just turned off the power so they can't be blamed for any fires that start. And that is risk avoidance. Now, I say it's a very extreme solution because everybody is really mad at them because they're the power company and now people don't have any power. That would seem to be a poor business decision, but it does mean if a fire starts, they can't be blamed for it. So that is one way to lower a certain kind of risk, but there's a high cost in it. Anyway, so you end up with a risk register. You keep a record of what you've done. You have all the risks, how dangerous they were, what you did about them, and that you need that so you can record what you've done and plan what to do in the future. So I've got some Kahoots about that. Let me bring them up. All right. This should be 3B1, and there it is. Put the wrong number on it, but I know what it is. All right, good. All right. I don't think deporting Trump is an option. Although, you know, that's the thing about his anti-immigrant stuff. We're all immigrants, except for the Native Americans. He's been here for, I think, like 3 generations or something like most of us. So, funny way. But there's well, if you start deporting people that, like Trump, you have to pretty much deport all of us. But of course, some people would like that. But most of us immigrated here for a reason. So at least a couple generations back, there was some good reason not to be where we came from. But anyway, war, famine, or just not a good job, you know. No, I don't think so. Says what? Here's Abdul will solve the problem. That's right. Having technical support back there, that's fine. There you go. Good. He got in?
Yeah.
There you go. Good for you. That's tech support. That's what we need, crowdsourcing. Good. There we are. So that's you. All right. So I think we got everybody. Let's give it a shot. All right. So the first step in risk management, what's that? Okay, that's the scope. Yep, you got to do that first. All right. What if you have a high probability and a low impact, what treatment is best? You just accept it. The classic example is the employees make personal copies on the copiers. It's very likely to happen. It doesn't really matter. It's far better to just let it happen than to waste all the time or money trying to prevent it. And there's a lot of things like that that are just not worth the bother. All right. So Dick's destroyed a bunch of rifles rather than sell them a couple weeks ago. So what's that? Dick's Sporting Goods. That's risk avoidance. They're going to stop selling rifles because they don't want to be blamed if somebody buys a rifle and goes and shoots up the place. So they are avoiding that risk. All right. So a list of risks and treatments. that's your ledger. It keeps track of what you've done. Just like a financial ledger keeps track of purchases and such. So that's Cap, and K Rob sounds like a real name, and M Hino is a real name.
So only 3 top people get points, right?
What's that?
Only 3 top people, right?
Yeah, only the top 3 people get extra credit. Yeah, that's right. All right. So let's take a look. So now we're down to these platforms, the official platforms. There are 4 of them we're going to talk about, 2 from the federal U.S. government, an international one, and another from an independent group. So National Institute of Standards has 2 of them. These are special publications. 800 is the series for this kind of thing. So 39 is the overall. Let's see if I can get this thing to go away. Zoom loves to put junk on the screen that won't go away. Anyway, it's free, so maybe that's how they punish you. Maybe in the pay version, there's some way to keep junk off your screen. Anyway, so this is for managing risk, the big one, 39, that's the overall one. And 30 is the more specialized one just for risk assessments. So 30 would be part of your 39 large risk management process. And then there's the famous ISO 27000, which is one you hear about a lot. A very, very big framework for managing your information security. And like the NIST ones, these are both multi-million-dollar projects to bring your company into compliance with these. A lot of layers of management. And then we'll talk a bit about FAIR. So here's the main one, managing information security risk. And this is the big picture of how you do it. So they have 3 levels. There's the overall organization level. Then there's mission or business process level, which would be some part of your business, like the manufacturing, the sales, the legal side, and then an information systems level, what we would normally think about from a technical program like this, where you're primarily focusing on the technology like firewalls and encryption and passwords and such. And so you have risks communicated upward, and then you have risk decisions communicated downward. So here's the diagram of all. You have the technical people at the bottom with setting up their encryption and networks and VLANs and everything. And then you got the business managers here, and then you got the business visionary leaders at the very top, and they're feeding information up, telling them about risks from the bottom that they should be aware of. And they're at the top, they're passing down policies and such to determine how to handle those risks. And that's the grand overall structure of risk management. So at the organization view, you've got governance. From the executive, these guys write policies and procedures, and they don't, of course, do any hands-on work with equipment. That's done by people down at tier 3. And in the middle, you've got enterprise architecture and security architecture, and these are people like your CSOs, and your CISSP kind of people that aren't got hands on the equipment, but they do know more about the technology, and they're handling a sort of framework to manage the risk. So you got to start with you framing, and then risk assessment, then risk response and risk monitoring. They all break this up into slightly different pieces, but it's all pretty much the same. You have to decide what to do. Then first you have to decide what risks to worry about. Then you have to decide exactly what mitigations to put in and put them in. And then you have to monitor to see how well they work, because none of the mitigations are perfect and nothing ever stays the same over time. So you have to have a monitoring and correction step. So then we can talk about the assessments. The assessment itself is here. And what this is basically just a series of sample worksheets that you use to guide you through it. And it's long and complicated. So threats and vulnerabilities are the first thing. What might happen and what weaknesses in your system might make it more likely. Then you got to assess the probability of occurrence. The impact is the harm done when a bad thing happens. And so you prepare for it, determine your purpose, scope, find a source of information. There are general spreadsheets provided in the standard of things you might think about. There are threat companies you can subscribe to that will tell you about the latest threats. And then that should be NIST. You've got a lot of example lists. Then you conduct an assessment. Here are threat sources and events. Here's some examples. They have a bunch of tables in the standard of threat sources, adversary capabilities, non-adversary threats. There are bad things that can happen that are not deliberate attacks by an attacker. There are things like power outages, employee mistakes and stuff. And then there's various kinds of threat events, those that are adversarial and non-adversarial, where they're a real attacker attacking you, and something that's not exactly human to blame, but still it's a bad thing that will happen, and you have to consider all these things. So risk management is not always just combat. A lot of it is just disaster recovery and surviving incidents like fires and floods and sickness among your staff. It's not like a human's attacking you, but it still is a risk and you have to mitigate. or to be fair, you have to treat it. Treating might include accepting it, but you have to consider the consequences and have a controlled, planned decision of how you're going to handle that risk. So you identify vulnerabilities. These are weaknesses that might lead to a problem. A vulnerability by itself does no harm. The only problem is a threat actor might come in through a vulnerability and do harm, and you have to decide what you're going to do about that. And so you consider these conditions. Then you got the likelihood of occurrence, the likelihood of initiation of a threat, occurrence, likelihood of it resulting in adverse impact. For example, I've done a lot of scans of city manual tests, not automated scanning, college networks, and I often find things like SQL injection, XML injection, but most of the ones I find are in minor systems, test systems, little library systems. And so in fact, although it's easy to exploit those systems, it doesn't really do any harm. You don't actually get to something that's full of credit card numbers or student grades or anything super important. You just get some little research projects data for a telescope or something that doesn't really matter to the mission of the company. So that's a low impact event. So you determine the magnitude of the impact, you determine how dangerous these impacts are and the various ways to measure it, and then you can decide what the risk is. So you have a scale, you decide what level of risk various items are, and typically you can't get them all down to numbers, so you just rate them into low, medium, and high or something. And once you've got you make a table of your best estimate of how much total risk various things provide, and then you have to communicate results and have to constantly update your assessment. So you're monitoring risk factors to see how they come in. So then there's the international standard, ISO 27000. And so this one is very much like the NIST standards, but it's the international version of it. So you establish your scope, you establish the criteria for determining risk and impact, and then you decide what criteria would be risk acceptance. So you have to somehow measure how effective your mitigation is and decide how you're going to do that. Then you make a logistical plan. And here's the risk assessment, just like before. You identify the assets, you identify the threats, then you identify the controls and the vulnerabilities and the consequences of various threats coming in. And now you can go through an evaluation and move into treatment, which is the same old thing. You can do mitigation, where you turn in something to prevent it, like a firewall. You can put acceptance, where you do nothing and just let it happen. You can avoid or transfer it. Avoidance is where you just quit doing a business process to get out of that business to eliminate the risk, and transfer is where you somehow move it to another company by outsourcing or buying insurance. Whatever you do, none of these are ever perfect, and you always have residual risk remaining. The risk can never be down to zero, and whatever treatment you put in doesn't lower it to zero, so you have to be aware of that. You lower it by some extent, and you have to decide whether you're paying too much to get too little lowering or not. And unfortunately, since risk metrics are very primitive, it is very hard to decide, and this is why managers get so frustrated. If you go to RSA, there's a giant floor room full of hundreds of vendors trying to sell you stuff, trying to tell you that if you buy my stuff, this will lower your risk. And in fact, usually it won't. Usually if you buy that stuff, it won't work, your staff won't know how to run it, the company will go broke and not support it, and pretty much it won't end up doing you any good. And the manager is trying to decide which of this stuff is actually worth getting and which of this stuff is not worth getting. So anyway, then you got risk communications. There's announcements, so people know about the assessments. You have to collect a lot of information during the assessment. And as any compliance officer knows, at other times, one of the big issues is to make people fill out regular reports and connect logs and so on. So you have the ability to gather information about what's happening. And then you have discussions and educational information and updates, and then communication about security incidents. This is probably the hardest thing. Most companies are not ready for security incidents, and when one happens, they do not handle it well, and they do not want to admit what they've done to their customers and to the government agencies and everybody involved, and so they try and cover it up and lie about it. LinkedIn, for example. LinkedIn got hacked. They didn't even know it. The criminals that stole the password hashes couldn't crack them, so they went on Russian forums and they posted 20,000 or 30,000 password hashes they couldn't crack. This hit the news. People like me went on that list and I found my password on there. Other people found their password on there because we could crack it better than the criminals. And then LinkedIn was still saying, oh no, we didn't get hacked. And then we said, dude, that's my password, you got hacked. And they said, well, the total loss was 20,000 passwords because they stole the whole database. It was like 50 million, but they only published the 20,000 they couldn't crack. We said, that's bullshit too. And then they said, okay, I asked our lawyers, and our lawyers told us we don't have to do anything about this at all. I said, it took like 6 months before they finally admitted, okay, we got hacked and we have to do something about it. And this is what you usually get. They weren't paying attention. They didn't know they'd been hacked. They tried to lie about it. Then they tried to lie again. Then they tried to pretend it didn't matter. People usually get dragged kicking and screaming into this. Just like the Catholic Church, they tell you your priest are abusing the kids. They just say, shut up, we'll pay you off, we'll kill the messenger, we'll hide it as much as possible until we're forced into it. And that's how it begins. It's not anything special about those groups. Every company did this. Like Microsoft's official position in the 90s was that hackers that find vulnerabilities should just shut up and everything will be fine. Don't tell anybody, nobody will ever figure it out, it'll be fine. And they always start with that, and then eventually realize that's not really going to work, and you really have to admit that you have problems, and now you have to have a steady stream of updates, and now you have to admit to your customers all the time, we messed up, we lost your data, our product was defective. That's not nice. People would rather say, our product is great, there's nothing wrong with it. They try to say that until they have to knock it off and admit the truth. So, it's a big deal. And I judge companies largely by how well they communicate security incidents. This is why I like Cloudflare. Cloudflare had like 4 major security incidents I know of. And every time they really came clean. Here's what happened. Here's why it happened. Here's what we did about it. That's the best you can do. Nobody's perfect. If they're admitting what they did wrong, that's a good company, as long as they're actually fixing it. Anyway, then you got to find your assets. You got to consider all the changes. Your assets change, your processes change. There are new threats and vulnerabilities. There are incidents. After you have incidents happen, you probably want to reassess the risk of future incidents. Obviously, if you get hacked, it probably means you were wrong in your estimate of how dangerous certain things were, and you probably need to readjust your estimate of dangers now that you've discovered that something was worse than you thought, and so on. That's why it needs constant updating. And then there's the FAIR system, which is just another independent way to do it. So this is considering primarily the factors that contribute to risk. So you got a way of 6 types of loss listed here. You got productivity loss, which is the work people are not getting done because the systems are down. This is probably the main thing you see from ransomware, which hit like 500 educational institutions this year, and hospitals, they're down, they're not serving patients, they're shipping them off somewhere else. Then the cost of response itself is not a small thing, as we've talked about. You send in an IR team from somebody like Mandiant, you pay a lot just for them to come in, or you pay a lot of time for your own staff to run around trying to figure out what happened and what to do about it. Then you've got to replace systems or software, and you've got to pay legal fines and judgments as all the lawsuits and legal punishments come in. And then you've lost competitive advantage. Now, all the time you spend on this and all the scandal created by it means that customers go somewhere else, and other people that didn't get hacked are sailing along, supposedly, and that's got to do with reputational damage, which is a real thing, but nobody knows how much it is. I know people like Target got hacked and they're just fine. TJ Maxx got hacked twice. Nobody cares. They just go back in and buy again. To a large extent, the end customers know that. I don't know what it means somebody got hacked. I don't know what it means that they supposedly got fixed. I just want to buy a shirt. I mean, what am I going to, how do I, and I often go to companies that have been hacked. I say, well, that probably means they've actually had their security looked at. The ones that haven't been hacked are probably less secure. Anyway, but there is some degree of reputational damage. The one that amazes me is Booz Allen Hamilton. I mean, Booz Allen Hamilton hired Snowden. They got totally hacked about 5 years ago. I saw the credit card numbers. They lost military data over and over, and they keep getting more contracts because inside the military, there's only a few companies that are approved, and you have to keep going back to them no matter how much they screw up. There's no real choice. So it's amazing how you can just drop the ball over and over and over again, and they just keep giving you the ball again. But maybe it'll change someday. So anyway, the things a threat action might do, they might access your data, they might misuse your data, or leak it, or disclose it, or modify it, or deny use to it. There was occasionally people steal data and just dump it publicly for the whole world to see. This was pretty popular in like 2011, when most of the attackers were not serious criminal organizations, but they were like teenage political activists that thought they were saving the world by dumping out data from a police department or something. But normally, when somebody steals your data, they do not dump it publicly or even admit it. They sell it on a private forum so someone can, or give it to a foreign government. Normally, handing out stolen data is not the best way to get value out of it. Only kind of a nut would do that. That's why it was very surprising when shadow brokers stole the NSA's cybercrime attacks and just dumped them publicly. And that was the Russian military rigging our election. And that's what leaked out. They pretended it was somebody else like Estonia. But the only reason why you would dump stolen NSA secrets publicly is to embarrass the US government. And they did that in order to influence the election. There is no apparent value in that to anybody. You don't make any money from it. Why would you want to just dump secrets out that are very valuable? You'd have to be sort of nuts, or you'd have to be on a mission other than making money, which was the case. Their mission was to influence our election, and it worked. Anyway, so I got a few more cahoots. You know, Woodward and Bernstein said follow the money, but sometimes there's other things besides money. It is really about money, because by getting Trump in, the rich people did get a lot of money, but they had an indirect path to get there. Anyway. So. I saw an article about the Russian interference in the election last week, and they said that most of the Russian disinformation was specifically aimed at black voters, which is a new fact that came out. I know the Democrats primarily target black voters, and Republicans too. They're actually determining elections a lot. They say no Democrat can win without the black vote, and that's why they said, I think, Biden was way ahead of Warren, because Warren's not getting black voters. Which, if any group of people will really vote and unite, they can really have a lot of power. I know the Republicans have been worrying about Latino vote greatly for the last couple of decades. It's, anyway. But I didn't know the Russians were onto this, but they are, and they specifically targeted. So, elections are a science, and our enemies know it as well as we do. Anyway, I guess we can go. So, what's the US government standard for risk assessment? It's 30. The big number is the overall risk management process. 30 is the specific one just for assessments. Which one has 6 types of loss? Okay, that's fair. All right. What's the US standard for risk management? That's 39. All right. And which one uses organization, mission, and information systems view? That's 39. People are guessing by process of elimination here. That's the American standard. All right. All right, so I see Cap again, and M. Hino again, and not Nick. Is that Abdul? Who's that?
That's not me.
Not you, okay.
I was the Trump one twice.
Okay, well, not Nick. Will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. Ed, maybe? I don't know.
I don't know if that's...
I didn't see Ed, yeah, well, anyway, they ain't gonna get their points. So are there any online people that want to give presentations today? Aha, here comes a chat message. Not Nick, okay, good, okay. Good, so now I know who that is, Jeff. Good, all right, and so are there any remote viewers? There's one, Vlad, okay. Vlad wants to give a presentation. Is it okay to have it recorded, Vlad?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. I'm gonna put you on the list of people to be recorded. And all right. So we probably ought to take a 10-minute break and we'll set up a presentation here. We'll pick up at 5 minutes to 7. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'll leave the share going. And we should get the people that want to be recorded first, and then the one who doesn't want to be recorded. So I'm going to